The bowl season is half over, but for the SEC, just beginning. One down, 11 to go. Bama says, let's make that 12 to go. The Gamecocks were dogs and won. So can the SEC sweep 12 games, maybe 13 games. Wow. Do bowl wins at Auburn, LSU, Georgia make up for regular season disappointments? It's an SEC Bowl blowout. We'll break it down and break it down and break it down even more. This is the SEC in 60. Join us every Monday if you want to see us live on Google Hangouts at noon Eastern Time and 11 o'clock Central Time. Again, every Monday on Google Hangouts. Dial us up there. Most likely you're going to catch us on YouTube at Mark Rogers TV and also at markrogerstv.com. We've got a podcast available just a couple hours after we're finished here, so look it up on iTunes and at Podbean under SEC in 60 or under Mark Rogers TV. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Facebook. We've got a Facebook page, and we will discuss and debate some college football. We've got quite a show lined up with all these bowl games coming up in the next few days. We've got Joe Lisi at GoForThe2.com, Stephen M. Smith to break down the Alabama-Ohio State game, Stephen M. with Touchdown Alabama, and, of course, 24/7 Sports, Connor Tapp to round us out on the hour. This is the SEC in 60 minutes of SEC football each and every week. So before I get to Joe Lisi of GoForThe2.com, of course, Jim Harbaugh, the big news around college football, it appears as though that announcement's coming very soon. Jim Harbaugh headed to Michigan. Does that affect the SEC? Not in the interim, I don't believe. But, of course, like Urban Meyer, he's going to be coming down to Georgia and Florida for some kids, and Michigan may be a more serious threat to pluck away some of the best talent out of the SEC country than Mr. Brady Hoke, although Hoke, never mind the record, he recruited well. He had top 15 classes at Michigan, but most of that came out of California. Most of it came out of the Midwest, the better players in Michigan, Ohio, and elsewhere. He was all over the place. Rich Rod did well. Recruiting at Michigan didn't turn out for him and trying to change the system and the culture there at Michigan. But, of course, Jim Harbaugh, a Michigan man, even though they said that they weren't looking for a Michigan man, he was the man out there. And I think that's an obvious choice. It's been debated how great a coach he is. If he lost the locker room and things didn't happen for him this last season in San Francisco, taking a team that was supposed to contend for a Super Bowl and finishing 8-8. But not only look at the San Francisco job he did in taking a 49ers team that was winning 3, 4, 5 games a year and quickly getting them to championship games and Super Bowls. Look at the job he did at Stanford, perennial doormat, getting to BCS bowl games, and David Shaw's, of course, continue the legacy. So Jim Harbaugh at Michigan should be interesting to see what he does in locking horns with Urban Meyer, who, of course, is locking horns with Nick Saban in just a few nights. One other thing I wanted to mention. So spending Christmas Eve with the kids, not really paying too much attention to football other than catching a few scores. Wasn't a whole lot to see there. Of course, we had the two minor bowl games with Rice and Fresno State playing that night, and, of course, the crazy Central Michigan, Western Kentucky. So I see the score. I picked Western Kentucky to not only win but cover the 3.5. I kept checking the score. Good to go. It's 49-14 early in the fourth, and then chaos ensues. Somebody tells me to check the score, and the next thing I saw was 49-48 final. Okay, got it right straight. They screwed me up with a backdoor cover, did Central Michigan. And then I got to see the crazy play like everybody else. Then throughout the day, and really more into Christmas Day and the next couple of days, I start to see what I'm guessing most of the time, because I didn't recognize all the Twitter handles, a lot of SEC people immediately defending the kick six as the greatest play in the history of college football. My initial reaction was, let it breathe a little bit. Let Central Michigan bask in the glory of being a SportsCenter top 10, of being everything that they're going to get in regards to, they didn't win the game, of course, they went for 2, thought they had the momentum, went for the 2. I would have kicked and gone to overtime. But anyway, they go for the 2, they don't win the game. So that's kind of the most important thing. But in terms of legacy and history, it's pulling off that play, because that's what people will remember, not who won the Bahamas Bowl. But for Central Michigan, I thought, let the kids bask in the limelight. Let's not start the argument quite yet. The other thing was, I don't think it really compares to the kick six in two ways. importance of the game obviously doesn't compare. You end the argument right there. You're talking about an SEC championship, one of the great rivalries in college football, to go to a national championship game eventually. So no comparison in importance. In terms of craziness, I thought it was a much crazier play. The kick six was lined up. Sure, it was crazy, 109 yards, but they built the wall. The kid just ran down the field. Chris Davis, 109 yards. So no comparison between the plays on the field. I will argue that all day because quarterback drops back, no time on the clock. Tremendous catch, the series of laterals, they get into the end zone, trailing 49-14 just a few minutes earlier. I thought that was by far the crazier play. If you're discounting the importance of the games, just talking about the play on the field, that to me is number 2 now all time, and number 1 still Cal Stanford over the kick six, because in terms of craziness, doesn't compare. Crazy play. Again, isolated in a vacuum. Neither one of those games meant a whole lot. That kept John Elway out of a bowl game. Can you believe John Elway never played in postseason play in college? That's about what that game meant besides the big rivalry Cal Stanford. Didn't mean much, a couple 5-5 teams right there. So want to argue with me on that one, we can take that one up. Again, in terms of just the play, hey, I go with this Cal Stanford, still number 1, banned on the field, crazy. And then Central Michigan's play, well, it doesn't have a nickname. Somebody's got to give this thing a nickname. I'm sure somebody has somewhere. And kick six at number 3. All right, let's talk some college football. Let's talk some bowl games. Let's get to it with Joe Lisi at GoForThe2.com. Hey, Joe, how are you?
I'm doing well, Mark. How are you?
Doing just fine. So don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this first game because by the time we hit the air for most people with the podcast and with the upload, this will be underway. But we got Texas A&M taking on West Virginia in the Liberty Bowl. I was looking forward to Clint Trickett against that Texas A&M defense. Unfortunately, he's had to retire because of 5 concussions just recently. So we've got an unsure quarterback situation with West Virginia. In terms of unsure, we know who it's going to be. We don't have a whole lot of game tape on the kid with 1 start. So let's start there with West Virginia throwing the football against this atrocious Aggies defense.
Yeah, interesting matchup. Clint Trickett's out. A little bit different quarterback in Skylar Howard. Completed over 50% of his passes, 5 touchdowns, no INTs. He's a little bit different type of quarterback than Clint Trickett. Clint Trickett, more of a pocket passer. Skylar Howard, more mobile, makes plays outside the pocket, but still not the same type of passer that Clint Trickett is. Clint Trickett, over 3,000 yards of passing offense, 18 touchdowns, had a really good quarterback to wide receiver relationship with Kevin White. You saw Kevin White's numbers dip a little bit over the last couple of weeks, even in that K-State game that Clint Trickett was out of the lineup. So I think it's going to be a different type of offense with Skylar Howard at the helm, even though we did get the victory on the road in Ames, Iowa against Iowa State. But I still like Texas A&M in this matchup. I think they have more speed on the defensive line. And you look at this West Virginia team, Mark, minus 15 in turnover margin. That's 119th out of 125 teams. They've been living dangerously each and every week. Shocked that they're 7-5 overall with a turnover margin like that. You normally don't see teams with winning records have a negative turnover margin that's so drastic, and West Virginia's done it. But I still like Texas A&M. I think Kevin Sumlin, more top-notch coach in terms of game plan, will have his team ready. I like Kyle Allen, offensive line by Texas A&M to win this game.
Yeah, I am going to be interested to see how Texas A&M responds on defense with a month of work under their belts. They, again, did not correct much. They're very young on defense. Of course, they've got the kid at defensive end who's a stud freshman. Trickett, yeah. Think about this, Joe. West Virginia came within this close of TCU. I made the argument that they really blew it. Hoverson, I think, blew the clock management in the last 3 minutes. They should have beat TCU. They lost on the last-second field goal after having a 9-point lead. They beat Baylor by 2 touchdowns. So the 2 marquee teams in the Big 12 with the argument to go to the playoff, West Virginia basically, in a sense, beat them both or split against them and played right there. But, again, no Clint Trickett. I was on the fence on this one, but I really like Texas A&M. It's down to a 1.5-point game. in Vegas, and A&M's getting 1.5, so I will take it and run. All right, we got an interesting one tonight, a slugfest of sorts. If you look at the defensive numbers and the offensive numbers with Arkansas and Texas playing in the Texas Bowl, your thoughts about the Longhorns, who people are looking at this as man, a white knuckler down to the wire, but I know we kind of differ, I think, from past conversations on how this one's going to play out.
Yeah, I really like Texas in this matchup. I like their speed on the defensive line. I know they've given up 162 rushing yards per game mark, but that's been at a spread offenses, a different type of rushing scheme than Arkansas likes to run with a pro-style set. I think they have speed and physicality on the defensive line. They have 39 sacks on the year, and they're very solid in the secondary, only giving up about 184 passing yards per game. You could watch that game last game in November, Thanksgiving night against TCU. Defensively, they played very well against Trev Boykin. You look at Charlie Strong. He's a big game head coach. Did it at Louisville with Teddy Bridgewater knocking off Florida. He will have his team ready for this game. They're opportunistic. I like Texas's chances on the offensive side of the ball to move it against the Arkansas defense. You look at Swoops, his ability down the stretch, 13 touchdown passes, but his mobility will be a factor in this game, and they have two solid running backs, Malcolm Brown and Jonathan Gray. I think Texas has a lot more playmakers than people give them credit for. Look for them to stretch the field against Arkansas, and I really like Texas to get the upset in this game tonight. I really think it's a mismatch, and I think Charlie Strong has his troops ready. They'll put 8 in the box and force Brandon Allen to beat them with his arm, and I'm not so sure he could do it against that secondary.
Well, Joe, when we throw stats around, I like to see who the stats were compiled against, and I just think Arkansas just took it through a much different gauntlet than Texas. Texas beat who they were supposed to beat. They lost to who they were supposed to lose to. The one exception would be West Virginia. I credit Texas for always scheduling out a conference. They had the BYU game. They had the neutral site game, although in Cowboy Stadium against UCLA. So they performed well in one of those games. That was a long, long time ago. They've gotten better since then. Arkansas has gotten a whole lot better. And I just think, wow, Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Texas A&M, when you run that kind of table and play pretty well, didn't get blown out against anybody, took Alabama to a one-point game, should have won that game, took apart Ole Miss. They caught the Rebels at the right time, definitely. The Brandon Allen pick cost them possibly the game against Mississippi State. Boy, they just played everybody outside of Georgia extremely tough, and then finally broke through. So if they were still riding this losing streak going into this bowl game, which of course would be impossible, but just for argument's sake, and hadn't proven that they could beat a quality opponent, and still were losing by a touchdown to everybody, I would go with you on that one. You got John Harris, to your point here, the Texas wide receiver, 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. Yeah, they're a better team on the outside than Arkansas. I just think the Razorbacks are going to pound them up front with Williams and Collins, and I think they've got enough with Brandon Allen's improvement this season to do damage. I think Arkansas is going to break this thing open in the fourth quarter. I think this is like 31-13 in the fourth quarter. All right.
I don't know.
I think this is like a this is a 14-13, 17-13 game in the fourth quarter, and then Arkansas breaks off some runs and really pounds them down and wears them down at that point. All right, Belk Bowl, Georgia-Louisville. Talk about quarterback situations. Unfortunately, the Cardinals probably not coming with their best against Georgia. They've played 3 quarterbacks recently, with Will Gardner going down with a torn ACL. The freshman Reggie Bonifan played in that Kentucky game, played rather well, brought him back. Actually, it was third stringer Kyle Bolin who played in the Kentucky game, brought them back to win that one 41-40. So they could play 3 quarterbacks possibly in this game, but it's definitely going to be Bonifan getting some time, the freshman, and the third stringer Kyle Bolin, who again got some valuable experience in that finale with the Bulldogs and the Cardinals. Joe?
Well, a couple of side notes. Mike Bobo, offensive coordinator for Georgia, now the head coach of Colorado State. He also took with him offensive line coach Will Friend. So both of those guys will not be there for the Georgia staff entering this matchup. And then Michael Dyer, former Auburn transfer, that as a tough inside runner, will be out for this ball game, ruled academically ineligible. So keep that in mind for Louisville as you enter this game. But I really think it comes down to the Georgia defense, Mark. Very opportunistic this year, plus 15 in turnover margin. They've done it on the road, plus 11 in turnover margin on the road or on a neutral field site. Very solid in the secondary, led by Damian Swan, only giving up 158 passing yards per game. Jeremy Pruitt mixes up coverages, likes to utilize blitz packages, a little bit different than former defensive coordinator Todd Grantham, who's now the defensive coordinator at Louisville. So keep that in mind. I think this is a dominant Georgia Bulldogs victory for a couple of reasons. Louisville giving up about 199 passing yards per game. You look at Hudson Mason, very efficient this year, 20 touchdowns, 4 INTs, completing 67% of his passes, but he's got speed on the outside with Malcolm Mitchell, Chris Connolly, Michael Bennett, Jeb Blazevich, the tight end. That, I think, will open up the rushing attack for Nick Chubb and Sony Michel. I really think Georgia has too many weapons offensively. I expect Mark Richt and the offensive staff to pass first, unleash Hudson Mason, making his last career start for the Bulldogs. They pass first. That'll open up the rushing attack for Chubb and Sony Michel. And I think this is a dominant Bulldogs effort. You look at Louisville's quarterbacks, both freshmen, a redshirt freshman and a true freshman, Bonifin and Kyle Bolin. Look for Jeremy Pruitt to mix up coverages, force those quarterbacks to read the defense, and I think this is a dominant Georgia victory.
I agree that Georgia's going to win this game. I hope Louisville keeps it close. I'd like to see a good ball game. To your point with the turnovers, and we run into this a lot during bowl season. Obviously, they're the better teams, although just about everybody makes a bowl at this point. But the better teams playing each other, so something's got to give. Meaning in this one, Hudson Mason doesn't turn over the ball. 4 picks this year. The Cardinals turn over quarterbacks, opposing quarterbacks. Led the nation with 25 interceptions. Gerard Holloman, first-team All-American safety, at 14 picks. It's an NCAA record. Won the Thorpe Award. Gerard Holloman, one of the best in the business in reading the quarterback and being opportunistic. Again, 14 picks. Mason doesn't turn it over. I like Nick Chubb. I like the running game. More so than the Georgia defense, I believe in that offensive rushing attack against a really good Louisville front seven that held down Duke Johnson, that didn't get torn apart by anybody in the ACC, including Florida State up front. I know the Seminoles don't have a great rushing attack, but Louisville is very sound up front, and they're sound across the board on defense. You think Louisville, Bobby Petrino, you think offense, but the defense ahead of the offense at this point. Yeah, that quarterback situation kind of troubles me with Louisville. I think Georgia's going to win this game. Mark Richt. Wow, I know that he's safe for right now. I just wonder for down the road when I see a guy like Bo Pelini win 9 games a year and get fired. I know the circumstances are a bit different because Mark Richt, very likable, does the right thing, good representative of the university, but it's still about wins and losses, especially at a place like Georgia, when they're going to possibly tire of losing 3 games a year. They were so close to winning the SEC East, and most people that evaluate talent would say most talented team in the division again, and they didn't get it done. All right, we got LSU and Notre Dame, Joe, in the Music City Bowl, and wow, Notre Dame, what a slide they took. I don't know if that near miss at Florida State where they really won the game, if the kid could have pulled off the pick play better, could have been a better actor, then they win at Tallahassee, and maybe it's a different outcome to the season, but they really fell apart after that. LSU did this season what LSU typically does, although they need to develop some quarterback play going into next season, and we'll see what kind of strides Anthony Jennings made in the last month.
Yeah, interesting, but I really think Notre Dame plays this game closer than people think. You look at Notre Dame, loses of 5 of the last 6 games, the last month and a half of the season. I think the time off will give them a chance to really refocus, recharge. I know Brian Kelly had mentioned that he's going to go to a 2-quarterback system with Everett Golson and Malik Zaire, the sophomore quarterback, but I really don't see that happening. I don't think Brian Kelly would tip his hat like that to allow John Chivas to prepare for Malik Zaire in this ball game. Doesn't really have a lot of big game experience, and Everett Golson, we know, struggled this year with 14 interceptions, but he does have 29 touchdowns. This offense is averaging 293 passing yards per game. They're rushing for 150 yards per game. They're averaging 33 points per game, and Notre Dame has two big play wide receivers in William Fuller and Corey Robinson, David Robinson's son, that have combined for 111 receptions and 19 touchdowns between them. So they have offensive weapons to move the football against LSU. You look at LSU's two losses this year to Mississippi State and Auburn, both mobile quarterbacks. Dak Prescott, Everett Golson's a mobile quarterback. I think Brian Kelly in the month off will use a pocket that moves, allows Golson to roll out on both sides, uses mobility, and I think that'll help Notre Dame in this game. I really like Notre Dame to keep this game close. You look at Anthony Jennings and Brandon Harris. Jennings completing only 48.8% of his passes. Brandon Harris only 55.6%. That's been the MO of the LSU Tiger offense. They can't stretch the field vertically against other teams, so they like to rely on that heavy offensive line. Rush Leonard Fournette, who's been a beast, but their center's out for this ball game. He's doubtful, so that's going to put pressure on the LSU Tigers offensive line. Center utilizes play calls, makes all the blitz pickups on that line, so that's going to be a key injury going up into this game against Notre Dame. In the end, I think LSU wins the game, but I think it's very close. I'm calling for a 3-point LSU Tiger victory. I like Golson and the crew to keep it close in this matchup.
Yeah, Everett Golson's a mystery to me because I watch him play and I see all sorts of talent, game-changing ability on the edge, and I think he's a really fine passer. The stats tell you otherwise. In the turnover category, he's just too careless with the ball. And so you wonder whether this is something that just needs to be cleaned up. A month off, a month to step back, go through practice, get back to fundamentals, get back to reading, going through your reads, doing all the right things, and just simple things in terms of handling the football, in terms of cleaning some stuff up in the pocket where he let it loose. He got strip sacked a number of times, that those things get cleaned up because he's a smart kid, or do they never get cleaned up because just that's who he is, and that's what it's going to be, and that's mighty dangerous for Notre Dame against an LSU defense that's number one. Did I get that straight? Number one in the country in pass efficiency, defensive pass efficiency, 98.7. LSU, considering they faced Blake Sims and Dak Prescott and Bo Wallace. That's pretty stout out of LSU. I know they lose the center on offense, but I just think they're going to hammer away with Fournette. We'll see the kind of improvement that maybe Anthony Jennings. We see this every year, Joe, during bowl season, that some coaching staffs are extremely effective at coaching up a particular player, and it's most evident and obvious to see in the quarterback position during that month time. And sometimes we see guys who were very shaky come out and play great games in bowl games, and then it proceeds from there. To your point about mobile quarterbacks against LSU, Nick Marshall, another example of somebody that they really struggled with on the Plains. That was Brandon Harris's one game. Les Miles doesn't lose bowl games very often. He's 6-3 at LSU. One of those games was in the mud against Penn State in the Capital One. Of course, one was a national championship game against Alabama. I'm not coming up with the other one, but he usually wins these things. Lost to Clemson and Tosh Boyd a couple years ago at the gun, a game he mismanaged horribly at the Peach Bowl in the last few minutes. All right, Joe, let's move it on to New Year's Eve, and I took a poll on this one. People love this game, and I can see why outside of the playoff games. Ole Miss and TCU at the Peach Bowl, and wow, this should be a great one.
Honestly, Mark, I think Ole Miss dominates this game from start to finish. I know TCU is the hot team in the country. They got jumped last week in the season by Ohio State, dominating 55-3 victory over Iowa State. But Ole Miss leading the nation in scoring defense, 13.8 points per game. Still have a solid defensive front led by Robert Condici, senior quarterback, and Bo Wallace. very efficient. I know he's been inconsistent in a couple of big games this year, but for the most part has had a solid season. You look at this offense, very balanced, throwing for around 275 passing yards per game, rushing for around 150 yards per game. So very balanced offensive attack led by head coach Hugh Freeze. But defensively is where the game is going to be won by Ole Miss. And you look at defensive secondary led by Cody Pruitt and Golson. I really think they match up well against on the outside against TCU's wide receivers. You look at what they were able to do against Texas A&M on the road in Kyle Field, a high-octane attack. Kenny Hill at the quarterback position, they shut that offense down. And then the offensive factor, X factor in this game, Evan Ingram, the tight end. He's got 656 passing yards per game, and he's got 6 touchdowns on the year. But you can look at 2 games this year against Mississippi State and against Alabama. Bo Wallace and Evan Ingram connected on big plays down the middle of the field. He's a tight end that TCU doesn't rarely face in the Big 12 conference, and he makes plays down the middle of the field against linebackers and strong safeties. He did it against Landon Collins in the second half of that game against Alabama, tore them up in the second half, and he beat Mississippi State single-handedly down the middle of the field. So this is an X factor for Ole Miss. Bo Wallace likes to find Ingram down the seam. I think they have a dominant effort. I think they can control the rushing attack of TCU due to the defensive front led by Kandichi. They're big. They'll force double teams. That'll allow Ole Miss's linebackers to really fill the rushing lanes and really make TCU one-dimensional. I think this is a dominant Ole Miss Rebel victory on New Year's Eve.
All right, Joe, I'm totally on board with you here. I love Ole Miss in this game. I think the defense is the best in the country. I think the one soft spot they had in the defense, and that this is relatively speaking, was we saw it against LSU. They pounded ahead for like 275 on the ground, but that's nitpicking because they held LSU basically to 10 points. I don't even know if the offense really drove for one of those, but the Ole Miss defense, just go game to game, and no defense was as consistently dominant against good teams. Performed extremely well against Alabama, held them down to 10 points. What went to Texas A&M when the Yankees were hot with Kenny Hill, held them to 6 into the fourth quarter. When it looked like they were running out of gas, they went to Arkansas, lost an ugly game there. They bounced back against Mississippi State. So the defense is rock solid. I think they got the best secondary in college football with Golson and with Connor and company. I just think it's in Hilton. They've got a tremendous secondary. I think it's the best defense in college football. I think it's arguable with LSU and Alabama and some other ones, Michigan State. But also, when you talk about Bo Wallace, he takes a bit of a hit for getting careless with the football, but I think he's a tremendous player. And I think that the two issues that Ole Miss had throughout the season was Wallace making poor decisions at times. Also, they couldn't run the ball for most of the year. When I say they couldn't run, they weren't dominant running the football, but they found creative ways against Mississippi State. Jet sweeps. They did some different things that they hadn't done before. They're not a conventional running team. It's not going to be Leonard Fournette pounding between the tackles. They showed us some different things that they can do to create a running game to take some pressure off Wallace. They played great aside from the Arkansas game against everybody. Nobody took advantage of that defense, and even the Razorbacks didn't tear up the defense. I love Ole Miss in this game. They're a 3.5-point underdog. I know TCU had a great year. I respect their talent and speed on offense, but Ole Miss is, they're one of the 6 or 7 best teams in the country. All right, Joe. Joe Lisi of GoForThe2.com with us. You're listening to or watching the SEC in 60, and we're on the SEC Fans Radio Network, so catch us there as well at SEC Fans. Actually, the URL's SECRadionetwork.com every day at 2 o'clock Eastern and 1 o'clock Central. All right, two of the matchups I want to see. I don't think it's high on too many people's priority lists because these other matchups look flashier. Before we get to the New Year's Day, of course, we're forgetting about the Orange Bowl with Mississippi State taking on Georgia Tech. And the age-old question, Joe, is can you prepare for the triple option attack, and can you do it in a month, and how effective are you going to be? I'm not that concerned about it with the Bulldogs, but let's dive into this one.
I think this is a dominant effort by Mississippi State. The only question I have is Jeff Collins, defensive coordinator, left for the Florida job, and Jim McElwain. But this is a defense that's led by defensive end Preston Smith, very opportunistic, and really have big defensive linemen that could fill the running lanes of the triple option. You beat the triple option by really defensive tackles that force double teams and can push the offensive linemen back and really disrupt that timing. And I like Mississippi State to do that. You look at this team overall. They faced Auburn, Mark, earlier in the year, and that's a high, octane attack that likes to rush the football with Gus Miles on. I know it was a wet track that day, but they did force turnovers against Nick Marshall, jumped up early and shut that offense down for the most part. They have a game plan in place. Preston Smith's a dominant player. They create sacks. And then their offense, Dak Prescott, a dynamic player. He makes plays with his arm and his feet. And you look at this Georgia Tech secondary, giving up 227 passing yards per game. You could throw over the top of that defense. I think Josh Robinson, Dak Prescott, those wideouts for Mississippi State, way too much offense for Georgia Tech to handle. I think if Mississippi State jumps up to about a 10 to a 14-point lead, it'll be over early. I think this is a dominant effort out of Mississippi State in this game.
Well, another stereotype out of this offense, and it's basically true, is that if they get down by a couple scores, especially against that set defense, it's going to be very difficult for them to come back. So that first quarter is vital for the Yellow Jackets to set the tempo and the pace of the game and the score of the game to make it competitive in the second half. Don't want to discount the passing game. Justin Thomas threw for 17 touchdowns and 5 picks, so when he put it up, he wasn't efficient in terms of a completion percentage, still like a 50% passer, so they're not going to be extremely efficient in the passing game. They will hit on some big plays or have in the past. Again, 17-5 touchdown to pick ratio, so under Paul Johnson, that's a ton of touchdowns out of the passing game. That's the most they've had at Georgia Tech. The issues they have, and we talked about this with Joey Weaver, the SB Nation Georgia Tech contact we have, that Georgia Tech's racked up some injuries. The most notable impact player is DeAndre Smelter at wide receiver, who, again, the stats aren't going to blow you away, 32 catches, 7 touchdowns in 11 games, but that's by far their most productive wide receiver. And what they lose out of that as well, that it doesn't really get counted on other teams, is the blocking ability of Smelter. I guess he's a great blocker at wide receiver. They've also had some other wide receivers get nicked up, and that really hurts their edge rush and what they can do on the outside, as opposed to other teams where the wide receiver blocking is kind of a icing on the cake scenario for them. They need those wide receivers to help out tremendously and win those matchups in the running game on the edge. Dak Prescott didn't play great the last half of the season, so I'm going to see him come out and play extremely well. Georgia Tech held up against what turned out to be a really good schedule. They played nobody early on, but they won the big games. They took Florida State within 2, and they won a game. I would discount just about all of that ACC schedule until they showed up against Georgia on the road and won that game. So I think that is the one game I can, from a comparative standpoint, look at versus a top-notch SEC team, probably the third, maybe fourth best team, probably third best team in the SEC, and say, wow, they did it against them. So maybe it happens. But I like Mississippi State pretty big as well. All right, Joe, I love these SEC Big Ten matchups, and I might catch a few chuckles out there after saying that. But if you look through the scores, look through the results, they match up at least 3 times per season, and it's going to be 4 with Alabama, Ohio State going at it. And the Big Ten plays them pretty tough. So got Auburn and Wisconsin in the Outback, and the Badgers come off of that hurting against Ohio State, and Auburn also on a down note after being in this championship talk much of the season, and they really collapsed near the end of it and should have probably finished off the tide.
I think this is a close game. I like Wisconsin in this matchup matchup. You look at their Big Ten championship game; they got beat up by Ohio State, 59-0. I expect a rebound effort out of the Badgers in this ball game. You look at head coach Gary Anderson moved on to Oregon State to take over the vacancy left by Mike Riley, who's the coach at Nebraska. Barry Alvarez, the athletic director, former Wisconsin coach, will coach this team. This is a team that's rushing for 314 rushing yards per game, fourth in the nation. Very heavy offensive line. It's not that I don't think Auburn has the playmakers to keep up and win this ball game, but where is this Auburn team right now overall? You look at this team, season-ending loss to Alabama. They fired their defensive coordinator, Ellis Johnson. I know they hired Will Muschamp, but he's just overseeing practices right now, really not implementing his style. And then they lost a teammate during the bowl preparation to an unfortunate homicide. So where's the mindset of this Auburn team? You have Duke Williams, who's still banged up, who might opt for the NFL draft. Sammy Coates will opt for the NFL draft. Where is the mindset of Auburn right now? That's the biggest question mark I have entering this game against Wisconsin in terms of being focused. I expect Wisconsin to be focused in this ball game because of their lackluster effort against Ohio State, wanting to prove to the nation that they're a lot better than that drubbing. So you look at Auburn overall, had struggled, and you can look at their schedule from October 11th, Mark, outside that victory over Samford. Their defense fell apart in every game from October 11th on, with the exception of Samford. Opposing offenses scored 30-plus points on that defense. That defense fell apart. They were solid in the middle of the year in terms of opportunistic creating turnovers, but from October 11th, every opponent within the SEC scored over 30 points per game on that defense. This is a rushing attack in Wisconsin where if they get going with Melvin Gordon, he's got 2,336 rushing yards and 26 touchdowns on the year, averaging 7.6 yards per carry. I really think this could be a tough matchup for Auburn. I don't expect Wisconsin to stretch the field with Joe Stavi. That's been the MO of the Wisconsin offense. They keep it low scoring. I like Wisconsin to get this victory. Not sold on the mindset and the defense of the Auburn Tigers right now.
Well, the conventional thinking is that Auburn's too quick, too fast. They get to the outside. Wisconsin got exposed against Ohio State, the most athletic team in the Big Ten, and the same thing's going to hold true here. But I'm in your camp in regards to I have a lot of faith in the Wisconsin fundamentals. I have a lot of faith in the Wisconsin program. So whether it's Alvarez, Bielema, Anderson, Paul Chris now, not in this game, but Barry Alvarez, I believe in the Wisconsin program. And no, they don't win all their bowl games, but if you go year to year, you're going to see very, very few bad performances. And they've played the SEC many times because of the contractual situation with the Outback and the Citrus Bowl, the Capital One, the Gator Bowl. Played a lot of games against the SEC, and no, they haven't won all of them. They lost to South Carolina by 10 points last year. But again, South Carolina team that was supposed to be, and probably were, faster, quicker, more athletic. It was a 3-point game, and if Wisconsin has any kind of quarterback play, they win that game. Melvin Gordon had a heyday. James White in that bowl game against South Carolina. I heard some interesting comments and some complete garbage this week about Barry Alvarez must have some enormous ego to think that he can just step out of the athletic director's chair and coach a football team. Okay, well, the guy's done it before. He has done it before, and as a solid touchdown plus underdog in the Rose Bowl, they played with one score of the Stanford Cardinal, one of the top 5 or 6 teams in college football. So he did it fairly successfully in that game. And it's interesting to note his final game as the official head coach of the Wisconsin Badgers back in 2005, they were a pretty heavy underdog against the Auburn Tigers, and they pulled off the upset in that one as well. So the only thing that causes me to not pull the trigger on an upset here is the same bugaboo that always keeps Wisconsin from being quite at the elite of college football. That's no quarterback and no dynamic playmaker on the outside. So I got an issue with that. All right, Joe, One more for you. We got Mizzou taking on Minnesota. We're going to let Tennessee and Florida play their games on the weekends. We got Mizzou and Minnesota. Fairly interesting matchup in the Citrus Bowl.
I think this is a bad matchup for Minnesota. I really think this is a dominant Missouri Tiger victory for a couple of factors. Minnesota has problems stretching teams vertically. They're ranked 121st in the country in terms of passing offense out of 125. Maybe it's 124. I could be wrong. In that area, they're only averaging 131 passing yards per game. Mitch Leidner, he's only a sophomore, likes to run the football, but hasn't stretched teams' defenses vertically. So that's going to be an issue going up against a speed team in Missouri, which the strength of that defense is run support. They're only giving up about 128 rushing yards per game, have speed off the edge with Shane Ray, who leads that team in sacks, and this team has 40 sacks on the year. This is a team that likes to run the football out of the spread and plays much better on the road than they do at home. They were 5-1 on the road or on a neutral field site. They're opportunistic, +8 in turnover margin, and this is a Missouri Tiger team, in my opinion, that has way too much speed for Minnesota. Cobb's a solid running back for the Golden Gophers, and they played their last couple of bowl games in the Texas Bowl against Texas Tech and Syracuse over the last couple of years. Very, very close. They didn't get those victories, but I think this is a blowout for Missouri. Matty Mock, Sasser on the outside, that offensive line, Hansborough, and that defense led by Ray, way too much offense and defense for the Tigers. I think it's a dominant victory by Missouri.
Well, I keep thinking a lot of teams are too fast for Minnesota, and they probably are, but Jerry Kill figures out a way to keep it close. I think these two teams just play close games. If you look at Missouri's travels through the SEC Eastern Division, they just play close games unless they're getting blown out by Georgia. So as long as they're winning or they're taking on somebody that's just can be overwhelming at times, Alabama in the championship game, they just play close games. They can play a close game against Kentucky, South Carolina, Florida, and I put Minnesota in that group of teams. They're a fringe top 25 team. I think both of these teams are around the 20th to 25th best team in the country. So I will probably pick Mizzou, but that's like a 6.5 point spread, and that's just too many points for me to go with Mizzou to cover. So before I let you go, Joe, I did my picks video last night. I've come into today's play at 11-7 against the spread, 11-7 overall. So I'd like to be better straight up, but 11-7 against the spread. So just to clarify where we stand, unless your picks under lock and key, I don't think they are. I think we can reveal them here. So Texas A&M, West Virginia, I got a 1.5 point spread here. You got Texas A&M to win and to cover.
Correct.
Arkansas, Texas, Hogs a big 6-point favorite, but you like Texas to, of course, cover, but they're also going to win the game outright.
Correct.
All right. Georgia, big over Louisville. So throw the 6.5 or 7 points away. Georgia wins big.
Yes.
LSU over Notre Dame, but take the Irish in the 7.5.
Correct. Notre Dame keeps it close. LSU wins the game.
All right. Upset special here. Ole Miss gets it done against TCU. So take the 3.5, but also take Ole Miss to win it outright.
Yes, sir.
Mississippi State takes out Georgia Tech. Lay the 6.5 or 7. Mississippi State wins big.
Yes.
Wisconsin pulls off the upset despite the 6.5 point spread against Auburn.
Yep.
Missouri runs away from Minnesota. They cover the 6.5.
That is it.
All right, I got Texas A&M to win and to cover 1.5. Arkansas wins and covers 6. I love the Hogs in this game. Georgia, now you're giving me something to think about. I love Georgia to beat Louisville, but I was taking the Cardinals plus the 7 points. I guess I got to stick with my pick. It's on records. It's on YouTube. LSU wins. I think they win big over Notre Dame. I think only their style of play keeps it close, but they're too much for the Irish, so LSU minus the 7. I love the Ole Miss pick. I think they win outright and, of course, cover the 3.5. And I like Mississippi State to cover 7 against Georgia Tech and run away with that game in the second half as well. All right, Joe, we appreciate you gutting this thing out. We know you're not feeling the best, so appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Mark. Have a happy New Year. Anytime.
Same to you. All right, Joe Lisi, go for the2.com. Check out his picks and so much more than that. You can also catch him on Yahoo Sports. He's all over the place with a number of things. So you're going to have to jump on his website and see what else he's contributing to, because it's a number of platforms out there. So I got two other guys on the line at the same time, so we may make this a bit of a conversation here. Got Connor Tapp of 24/7 Sports and also Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Mark.
Great. Hey, Stephen M., you with us?
I'm right here.
How are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
Okay. I think we'll talk. I'll see what Connor wants to talk about, and we'll jump into Alabama, Ohio State as well. Is that a good conversation for you, Connor? Talk about this playoff game?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. Let's start with Stephen M. He's Mr. Alabama. He's all over this. So if we could pick out one specific, as we try to grind this down, Stephen M., in regards to the matchups, Ohio State, Alabama, what's the one matchup that you really think you need to see Alabama dominate to take home the expected win?
The one matchup, Mark, is offensive and defensive line. I want to see Alabama center Ryan Kelly against Ohio State. I also want to see Alabama freshman left tackle Cam Robinson on Ohio State defensive lineman Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa and Michael Bennett are two of the most disruptive defensive linemen that Ohio State has. We know Joey Bosa has 13.5 sacks to lead the team. But Michael Bennett, defensive tackle, this is a guy that can create. Bennett strikes fear into opposing centers. He has a great leverage, can even get after the quarterback at times when he needs to, but he's just a true enforcer and get into the backfield, negating opposing team's run game. And we know what Joey Bosa can do with his size and physicality, creating leverage and get into opposing quarterbacks. So for me, the main matchup for Alabama and Ohio State starts on the defensive and offensive line. Can Alabama neutralize this front four of Ohio State? It's young, but it's very, very talented, and it's very disruptive, as I've seen on film. So if Alabama can neutralize the front four of Ohio State, this can be a very for Blake Sims, but also the run game of Alabama, because Coach Saban has mentioned that he will go against Ohio State. He will play a lot in the first half. You'll see more of Derrick Henry in the second half, but T.J. Yeldon feels good. The ankle's fine. The knee is fine. He will play. But my favorite matchup, offensive line of Alabama, defensive line of Ohio State.
So Alabama's like a 9.5 point favorite. The way people are talking about it, it sounds like it's more of like a 2-touchdown game. And I understand that, because the two things that are obvious, well, the one thing is completely obvious. It's the number one storyline, is Ohio State's playing with the third-string quarterback, who we've only seen play one game. It was under ideal circumstances, everything going their way. They overwhelmed Wisconsin. He didn't face adversity in that game. He's going to face adversity in this game. It's not going to be a 21-0 Ohio State lead. I would be shocked in the first quarter. So kid's going to face adversity. The other thing I don't think gets a whole lot of mention is this Ohio State team's kind of a year ahead of schedule. They are extremely talented, but, man, they got freshmen and sophomores flying all over the place on the field. They have very little veteran experience on this team. So, Connor, what stands out as your initial thoughts about this matchup?
Well, you pointed out the Cardale Jones aspect, and, it didn't really have to do that much against Wisconsin. That game was a blowout pretty much from the beginning, and we didn't really get a sense of what he can do under pressure. I think we have, based on what limited we saw from the Big Ten championship game, we have reason to think that he might perform well, or once Xavier Dixon and Jonathan Allen and some of these fearsome defensive linemen and linebackers for Alabama are bearing down on him, maybe it'll be a different story. We won't. I mean, the whole thing is we just won't know until January 1st gets here. So that's going to be interesting to see. One thing you always got to keep in the back of your mind with these Alabama teams of recent vintage is Will there be some special teams issues? They've had some field goal kicking problems over the past couple of years, as you know, is now infamous, I suppose. And you know, these are two really good teams, and I think it's probably going to come down to the end. And Alabama's ability or inability to make field goals may very well, you know, as unsexy as it is compared to, you know, talking about, you know, Cardale Jones and, you know, defensive linemen and those kinds of matchups, it may end up playing just as big a role as, you know, Boston College recently found out to their sorrow.
Yeah, very good point on that one. Yes, Alabama's had the bugaboo of which I really can't understand because Nick Saban's arguably the best coach in college football, assembles a staff that's tremendous, and they continually have kicking woes, and you would think that Alabama could bring in a kicker to get the job done. I don't know that that's been quite the issue that they've had in the past. I think they're a little sounder than they've been, but yeah, it's come up in a lot of big games. The interesting one in this one, the big storyline is, of course, Saban and Meyer have a history. They're arguably the two most successful coaches in the country. I don't think there's question that Saban's number one and Meyer probably an argument for number two in terms of track record success. So you would normally say, well, Saban's facing fill in the blank. They've got a huge advantage, or Meyer's facing blank in this matchup. He's got the advantage in preparing a team for 4 weeks, but they're facing each other. So any thoughts in regards to the Urban Meyer versus Nick Saban duel?
I mean, it's an interesting storyline, and certainly with, you know, sort of the talking point of, oh, Nick Saban scared Urban Meyer out of football when he was at Florida. That's a lot of fun. How much is there to it? Probably not very much. But two of the better guys at running football programs at major institutions over the past 20 years. So that's certainly very interesting. Two guys who've put together some really excellent coaching staffs from top to bottom, and give either of these guys a month to prepare, and it's going to be a really well coached game. I think I don't know that I give the advantage to either side based on coaching alone, because it's just really good on either side. I guess maybe Nick Saban has a little bit more recent success to point to, but it's neither team here is hurting for coaching talent.
Yeah, the one issue might be with Ohio State's offensive coordinator Tom Herman taking the University of Houston coaching job, and we can only speculate in terms of how that's going to affect the game planning and his focus and his time commitment there. This is the SEC in 60. We're joined by Connor Tapp of 24/7 Sports and also Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama. Hey, Stephen, the one area that seems to get pointed to in regards to building a formula or a game plan for Ohio State and pulling off the upset is throw it deep, take your shots. Cardale Jones has a big arm. He's got a rocket, and Devin Smith in particular is a guy that can get behind the secondary. That's been an issue for the Tide at times. Does that seem to be the one upset formula? And I know a lot of other things have to play into that, but the one bugaboo that could jump up for the Tide.
That way, Mark. I mean, a lot of teams this season, especially in the Southeastern Conference, have used that formula of just get the ball to the playmakers in space, get the ball deep down the field, use the deep routes, use the post routes, the double moves, the time crossing patterns to attack Alabama's secondary. But I think in this game, I feel like Eddie Jackson and Cyrus Jones, the two corners for Alabama, Cyrus Jones, a little bit more of the better coverage corner. They're both prepared for this game. Landon Collins has tutored both of these guys, has taken both of these guys under his wing, so to speak, and have taught them to not just play with confidence, but play with technique and understand your role and your job on the field. I look at this game, a defensive coordinator, Kirby Smart, is going to want to come after Cardale Jones early and often, using blitz, using stunt moves, using the front four. So a lot of times during this game, you can expect to see a lot of the corners of Alabama on an island against these talented Ohio State receivers. and it's going to be up to the likes of Cyrus Jones and Eddie Jackson to not only play the receivers, but also play the ball, make sure your head is facing the football, make sure you're staying in the receiver's hip pocket. I think that that's one of the few things Ohio State can attack and can get to, but it all goes back to mentioning the front seven of Alabama. If the front seven of Alabama really hits home, especially the front four, then it's going to be difficult for Cardale Jones to even get those balls out. So it starts off with the chess match between Tom Herman of Ohio State and Kirby Smart of Alabama. It's the chess match of how much can Tom Herman mix it up between the run and the pass, and how willing is Kirby Smart to take a chance on blitz, and how much willing, and if he does choose to blitz often, how much of an island will Cyrus Jones and Eddie Jackson be on?
Stephen M., have you made a pick on this game?
I finally made my pick, Mark. It took the whole Christmas.
Okay.
I had to eat 5 things of Christmas cookies, but I finally made my pick here. I have Alabama 38, Ohio State 17. The Buckeyes come out in the first half ready to play. Ohio State, a very talented first-half team. But as always, Alabama tends to show itself more so in the second half. They tend to make second-half adjustments, halftime adjustments. And Coach Saban, Lane Kiffin and company have the formula ready in the second half. I have Crimson Tide 38-17. Ohio State has the talent. The depth is just not there yet. Alabama, too much depth, especially on their defensive line. Alabama 38-17.
38-17. That wouldn't surprise me. I can see I would be surprised by something that we saw in the Big Ten championship game, something like that. But, yeah, 38-17 would not surprise me. I think it should be a little closer than that. But, shoot, 38-17 could be 21-17 at half. Could be good for a half. And then, as you so eloquently pointed out, Bama's got a track record with this group where Ohio State still – they've seen a few big games with Big Ten championship games in the last 2 years, but not quite on the grand stage of the likes of this yet. So, Stephen M., we appreciate the time. Thanks for jumping on with us. We're going to let you go. Thanks for the pick, and we will catch up to you later, man.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, that was Stephen M. Smith of TouchdownAlabama.net. Join him on Twitter. This guy is all over the place with his analysis of Alabama sports and, of course, football in particular, and the SEC and beyond at ESPN_future. We're going to finish things off with Connor Tapp at 24/7 Sports, digging into these other bowl games. Connor, what kind of has caught your eye, either past or future, in terms of what you'd like to see?
Well, of course, today we've got the 29th, we've got Oklahoma and Clemson, and that's a really interesting game to me. It would be a lot more interesting if Deshaun Watson were playing, but it's going to be a close game. Oklahoma only favored by 5. Clemson, has the best defense in the country at this point, and Oklahoma maybe a little bit more balanced, but I think Clemson's definitely got the best unit of both teams here in their defense. Also, maybe have the worst unit in the offense with Cole Stout, because when Cole Stout comes in, Clemson doesn't just take a step back. Like Benny Hill music comes on, and there are just turnovers all over the place. So how they're able to hold up against an Oklahoma defense that has underperformed, I think, based on what expectations were for this team coming into the season, it'll be interesting. I'm inclined to favor Oklahoma just because they're a little bit more well-rounded, and they'll have Shamaje Perine healthy for this one. But it's going to be an interesting one, I think.
So as soon as Cole Stout starts making mistakes in this game, that Benny Hill music's just going to be running around in my head, just crazy. I'm not going to be able to get it out. So I'm going to blame you, Connor.
Okay.
The rest of these bowl games, I was excited when I saw this come out because a lot of people dismiss the bowl games. They're exhibition games. I think they're extremely important because I think that's the first argument people go to when they start comparing conferences. I think it's also the only time that these teams, even the big boys, even take the Alabama-Auburn game. Was everybody watching that game? Well, the majority of the college football world, but still 3-4 other games on at the same time. This is the only time that these teams play in front of the entire college football nation. You want to watch college football at that particular time, you got to be watching that game. So I was excited to see just all these Power 5 teams, even the ones having down years, Lockhorns, LSU, Notre Dame, Arkansas, Texas, and on down the line. You mentioned that Clemson, Oklahoma. Yeah, I would love to see Deshaun Watson against Oklahoma, but we'll see how well Cole Stout does with a month of preparation. So any other games that are somewhat off the radar, maybe a little bit below the radar, that you're excited to see?
Yeah, I mean, if we're sticking with today, Arkansas and Texas is, I think, made a little bit more interesting by the Brett Bielema throwing the upside-down hook'em horns. You mentioned teams locking horns, in this case, literally, so I suppose. So that's interesting matchup of two 6-6 teams. You might not think that they've got a lot to play for, but these are two teams that I think, in the recent trajectory of both programs, very much on the upswing. Got a lot to be excited about for both of these programs going forward. So that's going to be a fun one, I think. Let's see. I don't know. Recently we had South Carolina, Miami. And that's a big one for me, being a South Carolina alum. Kind of a sloppy game, not the prettiest game, I don't think, for either team. Another 6-6 pairing, but South Carolina had just enough, got a late turnover to put the game away a little bit, even though Miami did end up threatening to force South Carolina to cede yet another late fourth quarter meltdown, but the Gamecocks avoided it this time. So that was interesting matchup of two teams that you don't get to see play a whole lot. Mississippi State, Georgia Tech, that'll be a fun one for a little further down the road. I don't know. There's a lot of good stuff. Like you said, it's a very different environment. Even some of these games that you might not think would necessarily command the type of attention because it's the only thing on. It seems like they've done a little bit better job this year of sort of spacing the games out so that you sort of get to take them in. I guess maybe a interesting subplot would be Todd Grantham, defensive coordinator for Louisville, now going up against his old team in Georgia in the Belk Bowl, and then and similar situation for Clemson and Oklahoma. Brent Venables, former Oklahoma, I don't think he was defensive coordinator, but he was a defensive assistant, maybe like assistant defensive coordinator for them or something like that. And so he'll be going up against his old team. So some interesting subplots there if you really want to look for them. There's lots of great. Some people talk about condensing the bowl games, fewer bowl games, but hey, it's a scarce resource we're dealing with here, and there's plenty to like in just about every matchup.
Yeah, if we started trotting out 4 and 8 teams, that would be one.
Well, sure.
hey, if you don't like a bowl game, don't watch it.
Right.
That's my thought. I know there's a ton of bowl games, but it's not a playoff. We have the 4 teams in a playoff, and if you really want to look at exclusivity, you're talking about 4 teams out of 125 that make it. How does that compare to the NFL, 12 out of 32, or Major League Baseball, 8 out of 30? 4 out of 125 make it, so that's pretty exclusive. The rest of this is just another game preparation for the next season, and I think it's great when we don't have enough non-conference games of magnitude in September to be able to start to compare these conferences a little and see a Clemson-Oklahoma game, an LSU-Notre Dame game, and on down the line, to be able to see those kind of schools play when, again, we have far too few of those, in my opinion. September is kind of nice. And you mentioned Brent Venables and the job he's done at Clemson. You know very well that Clemson defense has been ragged, talented, fast, ragged, blown coverages, missed tackles, blown assignments in past years, and this is a much different Clemson defense. He's really cleaned it up since he's been there. Connor, before we let you go, you touched on South Carolina, and while you cover the entirety of college football, it seems like a little bit of a focus on the SEC. You mentioned your attachment to South Carolina as a former alum, so Of course, you watched that game with great interest. So you gave us kind of your thoughts on that. But without Dylan Thompson going into 2015, can you give us kind of a preliminary look ahead in terms of what you would expect out of South Carolina? Is this a bounce back year maybe in 2015, or will the struggles possibly continue?
I think the best case scenario South Carolina fans can hope for at this point is maybe something like an 8-4 type of regular season. I mean, the offense is losing a lot. The defense was horrible in 2014 and is getting an infusion of talent. And the hope is, and there's Steve Spurrier after the game a little coy about, as changes to the staff, but I think most are expecting that at least a few defensive assistants will be parting ways with the team. Steve Spurrier kind of tends to prefer to let assistants with whom he has become displeased find other employment rather than firing them. You saw that back in 2007, probably South Carolina's worst defensive season before this year, when then defensive coordinator Tyrone Nix was permitted to find a job at Ole Miss before South Carolina then eventually went on to hire Ellis Johnson, and that sort of brought about the South Carolina defensive renaissance, I guess, that has now decisively ended. So Brad Lawing, a guy who was a defensive line coach for South Carolina for a long time and regarded as very much a technician and great technical coach of the position. He was employed with Florida, currently doesn't have a job. A lot of hope among South Carolina fans that he'll find his way back onto the staff. Ellis Johnson, also without a job right now. So South Carolina fans hoping that we'll be sort of getting the band back together. And there seems to be some reason to think that everyone might be interested in that happening. Of course, that would mean a demotion, at least for current defensive coordinator Lorenzo Ward. So it's kind of a lot up in the air right now, but there's a lot of talent coming in. Marquavius Lewis, number one JUCO defensive, and he's going to be an early enrollee. He's already signed his letter of intent and everything. So the big problem for South Carolina was up front defensively. You've got Lewis coming in. You've got Dante Sawyer, another JUCO placement coming in. You've got Dexter Wideman, another guy that South Carolina signed in the 2014 class. Could have helped out big time, but wasn't able to qualify. He's expected to join the team. So if the coaching situation can get settled on the defensive side of the ball, things should be much better for South Carolina on that end. Now, the problem is the talent is going to deplete significantly on the offensive side of the ball. Dylan Thompson's leaving, Mike Davis is leaving, the entire left side of the offensive line is leaving. You've got some talent coming back. It's just a question of who's going to distribute the ball to that talent. Connor Mitch and Perry Orth looked not great in limited playing time. Michael Scarnecchia was a redshirt freshman this year, but not a highly recruited guy. Lorenzo Nunez coming in is pretty raw as a passer right now, and he wasn't able to get in early as South Carolina hoped he would be able to. So the quarterback position is going to be a battle through, I think, the end of fall practice for the Gamecocks. And on the offensive line, South Carolina, not only are they losing some guys, but during that period where Steve Spurrier's future with the program was sort of up in the air, they lost some offensive tackle recruits that they were hoping to come in and contribute immediately. Paris Palmer, a junior college offensive tackle, and Austin Clark, who flipped to Virginia Tech, was expected to enroll early and compete for a position. And Natai Rogers, a guy that South Carolina brought in a few classes ago, no longer with the program. So it's going to be very much a patchwork offensive line for South Carolina in 2015. And, yeah, certainly the potential for a pretty good unit, but there could definitely be some bumps in the road.
Okay, folks, so if you had no idea what to expect out of South Carolina minus Mike Davis, Dylan Thompson, A.J. Cannon, that crew, you now have your footprint for 2015 thanks to Connor Tapp outlining some Gamecock personnel there and getting us set up for 2015. Connor Tapp of 24/7 Sports. Hey, Connor, we always appreciate it. You've just helped us tremendously throughout the last year. Have a great 2015 as it gets started in just a few days. Happy New Year, and again, the insight and the information is first rate.
Hey, Mark, thanks. Always a pleasure.
All right, again, Connor Tapp at 24/7 Sports. We were joined earlier by Joe Lisi at GoForThe2.com and Stephen Smith of Touchdown Alabama. You are either watching or you're listening to the SEC in 60, our little 60 minutes of SEC football each and every week, not just during the football season, 52 weeks a year, the SEC in 60 on the SEC Fans Radio Network, the venture launched by Dr. SEC. We thank him for inviting us on his network. You can catch us at secradionetwork.com, and also, again, the video is available on YouTube at Mark Rogers TV sometime on Monday afternoon once it gets uploaded. And the podcast available as well, just a couple hours after the live show here on Google Hangouts. So catch us on iTunes or Podbean. Just search Mark Rogers TV or SEC in 60. All right, we're just a few days left for 2014. We wish you a happy new year. May God bless you. Enjoy the football, and we'll see you next time.